What's cracking, guys? Omar Esoff here in the secret office. Coach Brian, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Omar. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good because we're talking about weightlifting and we're talking about something important. As you know, a lot of people are now getting into weightlifting, maybe watching the videos or just trying to do it on their own. But you see a lot of mistakes. We're not talking about technique, that's a whole other video. But in particular, programming. As a coach, someone that's coached a lot of athletes with a lot of experience, yourself, you see a lot of programming mistakes. Can you go over maybe some of your top mistakes? If you gotta talk about the biggest, because you said like you got 5 tips, what would be the top tip then?
Well, the number one most common mistake that we see is that people do not manipulate the training load in their program.
Okay.
So the number one most common, most important variable when being an Olympic weightlifter is the load.
The way you lift, how much you lift.
How much is on the bar. Got to do that in an intelligent way.
Right.
So the training load is the most important variable that we manipulate as coaches to get you to your goal.
And that doesn't just mean like a linear periodization when you said lift progressively heavier weight. There's a science, there's an art to this. Can you get a little bit into that when you talk about loads? Like, what are these mistakes?
Yeah, especially in the sport of Olympic weightlifting, linear periodization is not very effective.
Right.
You're only going to get so far, even as a beginner, by incremental gain. Just by nature of the fact that the sport's very technical as well as neurologically demanding, you do have to manipulate the load. The best coaches in the world are separated from good coaches by the way in which they manipulate the load. It's almost an art form. It's amazing to watch. For the more advanced lifters, this is usually done by prescribing load based on a percentage of their 1 rep max.
Right.
And that's easy to do in an intermediate to an advanced lifter because you know what your 1 rep max is. And a good coach should be able to prescribe training load to you based on those numbers.
Okay.
And that's actually easier. However, the more beginner the athlete is, it becomes a little bit harder to appropriately prescribe load.
Right.
So what we do with those clients instead is we let the rep scheme dictate the training load.
Okay.
So for example, if we were prescribing 6 sets of 3 reps power snatch from the hip, within that power snatch from the hip, we want the bar speed to be high.
Yep.
We want the technique to be good and sharp. So your coach should be manipulating the load throughout that workout to ensure that the bar speed is high.
Yeah.
And the technique is solid. Probably the most important thing to monitor during your workouts is bar speed.
Right.
Obviously, technique is important too. So by allowing the rep scheme to dictate the training load, that's a really kind of easy general rule of thumb that we use for beginners to make sure that they're not lifting too heavy,
Yep.
but so that they're also lifting a weight that challenges them enough that they continually get stronger.
Right.
And progress throughout their phase.
Okay. So technique, bar speed, then judging by reps. When it comes to more advanced lifters, obviously the load and how you play with that, how you periodize the program is massively important.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say training an elite lifter is way easier than a beginner.
Really?
I just think it's easier. There's a lot of repeatability in their lifting. They're very reliable. And their 1 RM probably hasn't changed for years.
Right.
Right? So manipulating their training load based on a percentage is a very repeatable and reliable way to do it.
Bouncing off of that, differences between, say, a beginner lifter and a more advanced lifter, we have to talk maybe about rest intervals, you're saying, when it comes to lifting?
Yeah, so related to point number 1,
right.
I would say the second most common mistake that we see in program design for an Olympic weightlifter is that the rest interval does not reflect the training load.
Right.
So, for example, if you have a very elite lifter that maybe their max snatch is 150 kilos.
Okay.
And for that training day, they've got 6 sets of 1 rep at 95% of their 1 RM, right? So they're lifting a lot of weight.
Yep.
That lifter is very neurologically efficient.
Yep.
Obviously, and there's a lot of motor unit recruitment to get that job done.
Right.
That lifter needs more rest than the average Joe to be able to do that again from set to set to set. We could be lifting your 90%,
yeah.
But if your 1 RM is 42 kilos,
then
you don't require
6
the same.
minutes.
Yeah, you don't require 6 minutes
yeah.
to do that again. Like your neurological demand isn't quite the same as
right.
the guy that or the girl that snatches 140 kilos.
Right.
So it's different there.
Yeah.
So basically, the rest interval has to reflect the load being lifted, not just in the percentage of 1 RM, but in the person's training age and how much they're lifting, period.
Yeah, and you got to make sure also you're saying too that they rest enough so that when they go they don't get more fatigued or technique doesn't get sloppy. Like this isn't like a WOD, this isn't like CrossFit. You're trying to lift a maximal load.
Yeah, very different. Our training goals are very different than that of CrossFit or circuit training or whatever it is you're doing. We want bar speed, and we want to lift as much weight possible. So if you don't give yourself adequate rest in between your sets, one of two things needs to happen. Either you have to decrease the weight from set to set to set so that you can maintain good technique, or the technique's going to go out the window.
Okay.
And we don't want either of those things happening.
Yeah.
So if the load requires you to rest 3 to 4 minutes or whatever it is in order to maintain the quality of training from set to set to set, we have to take it.
Right. Okay. So rest interval and also understanding that percentage of a 1 rep max doesn't necessarily reflect the amount of time you need to rest.
No, not necessarily. It's different for different people. Beginners have different rest interval requirements than advanced people do, and they have definitely different load prescription requirements than advanced people do. And that's where, having an intelligent coach. Comes in handy. Anybody can download a program off the internet and
cookie cutter program.
Yeah,
you're not going to follow some elite lifters like rest 6 minutes. Like you're only snatching 40 kilos, right?
Yeah.
A cookie cutter program is probably not a good idea.
Yeah, you could download, a world champion's weightlifting program and follow it to the T. It might not have the same effect on you than it did that person.
There's a lot of variables going into that.
Having a good coach that knows what they're doing is definitely an advantage in that respect.
So we're going to keep this short for the first portion, the first video, just going over the top 2 mistakes. You're talking about load, you're talking about rest intervals, right?
Yep.
If you want to see part 2, going over points 3, 4, and 5, make sure to like the damn video, leave a comment below. Coach Brian, thank you so much for being on.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Man, laying this wisdom down. You should follow him on Instagram. Brian, what's your Instagram?
Hit me up at B_Marsh27.
Do it. And once again, guys, appreciate the support. If you liked the video, make sure to like the damn video, and I'll be seeing all you guys, my rascals, in that next one. Peace.